Joining me now is Ayman Mohyeldin, the host of Ayman on MSNBC. He has extensively covered Gaza, including during the 2014 war. Ayman, it's great to see you. I've been wanting to talk to you since this began. The idea of defeating Hamas, it seems at once quite obvious and yet just unbelievably elusive. Because at this point, Hamas seems to be as much an organization as it is an ideology, and one that will apparently, if you believe the New York Times, claim victory no matter what. Do you think that it's a goal that can even really realistically be approached?
I think if the goal is to destroy the organization itself, there are certainly tactical ways that Israel has tried to do that in the past. And history is the best lesson here, because if you look at what Israel has done repeatedly since 2006, even before that, it has gone after Hamas very aggressively. And we should be very clear about that, because Israeli military officials, certainly retired ones, have been clear about that. Yeah. They have killed the spiritual leader of Hamas. They've killed political figures within Hamas. They've killed senior military commanders within Hamas's military wings. They've killed financiers that tried to raise money for Hamas, bomb makers, drone makers. They've gone after all of them. And they've gone into Gaza in 2014, 2008, Operation Cast Lead. This would be the fifth war in the span of 15 years in which Israel has gone into Gaza and tried to destroy it using air power, everything it has. And every time, Hamas has shown itself to be resilient, and in some cases has even bounced back with stronger capabilities, as we've just seen now. Yeah. This is the deadliest. So to your point, I think you're right. There is an argument to be made that if you go in this time and reoccupy Gaza, you could perhaps destroy the structure of the organization. But if you've studied Palestinian history and looked at the rise of militant groups over the years, you would see an evolution from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, in which when one organization is defeated or destroyed, another one evolves in its place. And I think that is the fundamental issue here. Because Hamas is an ideology that builds itself on a central tenet of claiming to be a resistance movement to Israel's occupation, there is always going to be an ability to recruit from Palestinians and get support from countries like Iran who buy into that and are able then to take the next level or to the next organization or to the next generation of fighters.
Regardless of whether they call themselves Hamas.
Exactly.
Or something else. You are one of the very few people that I know, I think, that are on TV that's actually resided in Gaza. You understand the architecture of that region. There is the sort of ideological battle against Hamas. There's the tactical battle against Hamas. And it seems, I wonder if you could explain a little bit more about what Israeli security forces, defense forces are facing as they try and rout out Hamas fighters from such a densely populated area.
Yeah, I mean, there's two layers to the challenge. And I was based as a correspondent in Gaza from 2008 till 2010. I covered Operation Cast Lead, and then subsequently would go back for various operations and wars that happened there. And in the 2008 war, Israel's challenge was to essentially cut Gaza in half, to try to separate the northern part of Gaza, which has Gaza City and very densely populated, from the southern part of Gaza, which was more farmland, but also had big refugee camps and also very densely populated areas. So in addition to the ability of moving around in these densely populated areas with tanks, armored personnel carriers, air power, over the last several years, Hamas has been able to develop a very complicated and sophisticated network of tunnels underground. And in that capacity, it was able to penetrate Israel, cross borders, lay booby traps for them as they moved in, certainly in the northern part of Gaza, like the refugee camps in Jabalia and elsewhere. And it made it very difficult for the Israelis to not only take Gaza, but take and then move within Gaza. So in Operation Cast Lead back in 2008, 2009, they did successfully control the entire territory. They divided the territory in half with their tanks and armored personnel carriers. But once they were in there, they stayed outside of the urban centers. Yeah. So it was easy for Hamas at that time to withstand the pressure. Obviously, if they go in this time, they're not going to repeat that. They want to go into the urban areas to really weed Hamas out. But that is where Hamas wants the fight to be tactically, and that's where the danger is going to lie for both Israeli soldiers and the civilians who have not gotten out. And
hostages.
And hostages, of course, and the hostages. And it's important to remember one thing about the Palestinians who may want to leave and who may not want to leave. And I heard an earlier guest on our show say this, which is that 60% of the Palestinians who live in Gaza are descendants of two generations of Palestinians who have either been expelled from their homes or removed from their homes in 1948 and 1967. Yes. So there is this kind of generational trauma that exists among Palestinians about not leaving their homes out of fear of what comes next. So as a result, Palestinians who may want to leave maybe a large part of it, but there will be Palestinians who will say, this is our homeland. And we know what happened to us in 67. We know what happened to us in 1948. When we left our homelands as refugees, we were never allowed to return.
Let me ask you one more question. There is a lot of talk about whether or not Egypt will help open up a humanitarian corridor for those Gazans who wish to leave.
Yeah.
It seems like it's given the lack of resources, the electricity, the water, the bombing of, hospitals and so forth, that there's probably still a sizable population that very much wants to get out.
Absolutely. And we saw that previously.
And are you at all bullish, optimistic that Egypt will be convinced to open up a humanitarian corridor here?
I am not convinced, and they have not done it in previous wars. And the argument that Egypt provides, and I know that we've been hearing from American officials that they are working on that, and it would be very interesting to see what, if anything, changes the calculation of the Egyptian government. Previously, Egypt has taken the position that if they opened the corridor for Palestinians to leave, that they would become responsible for the refugees. And they've learned from neighboring countries what has happened when other countries have taken refugees and are abandoned by the international community or not. Egypt's position has always been, we will not absolve Israel's responsibility for the people of Gaza by accepting them into Egypt and ultimately being the only party responsible for them. There are no guarantees that if the Palestinians leave Gaza to come to Egypt, they'll be allowed to return to their homes, as we have learned from history. And as a result of that, Egypt has taken a position that the only way to deal with this crisis is through a multi-party agreement. So I've been watching the language of American officials, Jake Sullivan, Admiral Kirby, even the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, today before he headed to the region, was very clear. We're trying to work on something. What that looks like, I think, will be very telling. But I don't see the Egyptian government now just simply unilaterally changing a fundamental principle that it has held onto in 4 previous wars. They may try to offer relief. They may offer certain amounts of people to come through, but they have never opened the border to simply allow hundreds of thousands, if not 1 million people, just to come and reside into the Sinai Peninsula.
Ayman Mohideen, you are a wealth of information and such valuable perspective in this moment. Thank you, my friend, for joining me on set tonight.